Welcome to the Arena Ridiculous podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined by Brian Gottlieb, and it's not a new year, but like new year, new us, I guess, something.
Just because you have a new microphone doesn't mean anything has really changed all that much in our world. What other things are creating this new us? I mean, you sound beautiful, rich, luscious. I'm sure everyone is enjoying that. But what else is new about us this week?
Well, before the show, you said that you could basically hear more of my voice, which I don't know is necessarily a good thing. So if people want me to go back to the old crappy mic, I absolutely can. The other thing is that this mic is not new. It's about 4 years old and has been sitting in a closet after I got frustrated not being able to make it work. And I just moved into a new place out of my... It's not the worst place I've ever lived in, but it had some very particular quirks that were interesting, let's say. So I'm out of that hellscape, and now I'm into a new place, which already seems quite good. Not 100% perfect, but definitely a lot of really, really good stuff that I appreciate. So that's cool. And yeah, dude, I had enough energy to mess around with this mic again and actually try and get it to work. So that's good too.
I'm very excited about it. Would you say that you've ever lived in a place that was perfect? Because I don't think I have. And I'm just curious if that's a me thing. Like at some point when we moved into our new house, you know, we'd get upset about various things because it's the first house we've ever owned. And at some point I was just like, look, it can't be perfect. We just have to appreciate the good things about it and like let the bad things go or address them to the extent we can. But no house will ever be perfect is what I came to as my end conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially worse when you're talking about buying the house.
Yeah.
Because then you're mostly just stuck with it. But like thinking back, there was a place, I think the first place I lived in Indianapolis was actually pretty reasonable. I don't remember having any complaints there. Then for Seattle, when I was living by myself, I had an apartment, and that was good when it was just me.
Okay.
For a little bit, I had someone crashing there, and it's like the place was not meant for two people, right? And then I had like a girlfriend living there for a while, and it was like, again, same sort of problem where it's just like this place is just too small, you know? But for just me, when I didn't have any pets, it was pretty awesome. Like location was good, had everything I needed. Problem was, I don't know, just like apartment parking lot that's like not gated or whatever. It's like my car got broken into a few times, but whatever, you know, I think that mostly just happens, but I don't know. I like those places. So I guess I wouldn't say that they're perfect, but at the time I don't remember there being anything wrong with them. And I'm very critical. So
yeah, if I were to like give my closest answer, it would be the kind of, I don't know what else to call them other than like McMansions, like the big townhouse, but like multiply linked townhouse thing. Just like any complex where you can rent something that's like above your typical block apartment kind of fits the bill. And thinking about a couple of those I lived in where ostensibly the inside of the house was like pretty close to perfect, no real noticeable flaws. But at that point, the problem becomes you were attached to someone else and like sharing a wall with a neighbor, or again, the parking lot thing was definitely something I experienced. So those probably get closest, but still have that like huge major flaw that you can't escape. So maybe I just need to build a new house. Maybe that's the key.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean me personally. That would not,
no,
I promise that house would not come out good. But
yeah, of course. But even just thinking about what you want your house to look like and the layout and everything, like that's a lot of work. And then inevitably you're going to mess something up, or whoever is not going to know that, like, you know, you build it this way and then it's going to have this problem or whatever, you know?
And then you have nobody to blame. That's the worst part about it. Like I can push all my problems on other people right now. At that point, it's solely my responsibility. And
you're stuck with it, and you know it's your fault. That would be the worst. But I mean, maybe you gin it, you know, maybe you spend like years planning this thing. Like I've certainly been thinking about the things that I like and appreciate out of the places that I live in. And just one thing is just like easily accessible laundry. Like don't make me like go downstairs to do laundry or whatever, because I'll never do it. Right. But the last place that I lived in, despite being a hellscape, had like a very open floor plan with some bedrooms. It was like kind of studio-ish, but with bedrooms, right? So then there was just a closet with laundry right next to my kitchen, and it was like, that's awesome.
Do you know what I think I want to live in? And it's very hard to test this theory because I've never actually seen it before. I think I just want to live in a giant glass cube in the woods, like just a huge cube, squares. I don't want anything inside of it. I just want it to be like a holding pen. That's a giant cube. I mean, I guess you could have like a bathroom. You generally don't want your bathroom out in the open, but everything else could just be this huge open space in a giant glass cube. I would like to try that.
I think that's perfectly reasonable. I don't know. I mean, like you're married. I assume that at some point, you're in another life, maybe streaming and making noise, and maybe she's playing music or watching TV or something, and maybe you want some sort of wall to separate the noise somehow. But I get what you're saying. Like, I don't understand the need for like all of these walls, and it's just kind of nonsense when you're talking about, a 1 or 2 bedroom place, basically.
Yeah. As soon as you mentioned the noise thing, that was very real and obvious problem, as I'm currently locked away in my office, and I think my wife is on a call right now. So if it was not for the fact that we had rooms, it would be problematic. This is a very utopian world, though, where I'm not worried about such small concerns, and we're just free to live our life as we want.
Yeah, I'd be down for a cube, man. Cats, I feel like, especially if it's just glass cube, the cats would love it. I would obviously try and get a bunch of platforms on there and hope that they don't just get confused and hurt themselves. But, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think they would figure it out. I think a lot of it's going to be in the setup. You could have like a whole cat gym. Like if it's a tall enough cube, you could have like a cat gymnasium running overhead.
Oh, yeah, dude. That's the absolute dream.
That would be incredible.
I went to the gas station a couple nights ago, and there was a stray cat, and it's really hard to say no,
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, as the person who still sends me pictures of a neighborhood cat resting peacefully on his pillows.
I don't know what you're talking about. We said we wouldn't let that cat inside anymore. It can't possibly be my cat.
Oh, okay.
Probably old pictures.
Well, we have a new Magic the Gathering set also, and normally this would be about the time when we talk about standard and implications, 5-set standard going into 6-set standard. I played a little bit of standard the last week, did some deck building, some healthy exploration of the format, went to check out good old twitch.tv to see who was streaming and what kind of standard ideas were out there. No one. Absolutely no one playing standard. Decent amount of limited, and obviously, some pioneers, some modern, whatever, right? And then you mentioned to me that there were some events, I don't know if it was like last weekend or whatever, a couple weekends ago, where the only events that were not firing were the standard events.
Yeah, it was this past weekend, so coinciding with the Brothers War pre-release.
Okay, and I'm not going to say that's wrong, like it shouldn't be happening, because it makes total sense, right? When there is no push for this format to matter, for these events to matter, then no one is going to play it, right? Like standard was never really a format where you had your diehard players, and that was definitely modern. It's like not even close to like modern PTQ season or whatever, and people are still playing modern weekly or playing modern on Magic Online and whatnot. And standard was just never like that, and especially with a lot of the problems over the last few years, those two things combined, I think, just kind of, I don't know, just obliterated the format. And are we just supposed to not talk about it at all, man? I don't know. I was building decks, playing games. It's kind of fun.
I wish I knew the answer to that. I really do, because it's so frustrating. And there's like this bigger problem that's coming to light with it. And that problem is, are these sets still being designed for, like they are? There's still the primary thing you're thinking about is, how does this balance in standard? How does this affect the standard form? I mean, you're considering other things for sure. Magic has evolved beyond just like make a good standard metagame, see what happens beyond that. But for the longest time, I know for a fact the approach was design good standard cards, let the eternal formats sort themselves out.
Right.
100%. That's how things were done. And then there was things like Modern Horizons, which broke that rule. Some say to the negative impact of the format, some say to the positive. I tend to lean like in the middle. I think it's got ups and downs, as all things do. But if you're not designing these sets for standard, why do they exist? Like, shouldn't everything be Modern Horizons level power? If you're not making cards that have to fit into standard, like at some point, these sets are no longer serving anyone. And I think what has changed is that there's just a shit ton of legends all over them. Like all of the sets, just absolutely lousy with legends. And that's what's designed to sell them. And it kind of sucks. And I kind of hate it. But we just need a long-term plan, a long-term solution. Like if you're going to get away from standard, get away from it. Cut ties. If you're going to bring it back, you need to work to bring it back. And I don't even know that you can save standard anymore. I think things are that dire that people just will not ever consent to that mode of buy-in again.
I think, yeah, kind of along the same lines as what you're saying is maybe the sets are like being designed for standard, but like why? Like if you're not going to push events for it, then don't do it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, you're talking about like why are they still being designed for standard? Why do they still look like this power level or whatever? And honestly, I don't think this was a thing that they planned on happening as of today, right? Like it was probably not a thing that was planned. Like certainly.
Well, you saw, I don't know if you caught it on Twitter, but Aaron Forsyth was tweeting, why don't people like standard anymore? Of course, somebody posted the hot dog costume meme. We're all looking for the guy who did this, which like somewhat unfair, but like still very funny. And I enjoyed it. Yeah. I think you're right that they don't actually know the position of standard and they don't know how to fix it is the larger problem. And where does that leave the game at that point?
Tournaments for the format.
Not an option. Sorry.
I mean, I guess they did just do that for Worlds, right? So that is a thing. It is clear that at least to some degree they're trying to push it, but like why not try and make a concerted effort to have that be one of the formats for the PPTQs?
They need to consolidate player bases. They need to get back to the idea of shared experiences. I mean, I'm fucking blue in the face. I've been saying this for years now. Like have a PTQ season that is standard and you've probably fixed standard to some extent for some people. And like, does that solve the broader problems? No, but you can build from that. If you don't have that foundation, you don't have anything. You have no grounds to stand on.
There's also some other things that you've been saying for a while that have kind of rung true lately. I guess we could just do entire shows about that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to hear a show of I told you so's. And look, I know what you're talking about, like basically Bank of America stuff and
crypto.
And crypto, sure. But to be honest, the Bank of America report is basically meaningless. And I say this as someone who was very involved with these industries for a long time. Its actual findings are irrelevant. The person writing it does not have the knowledge of the industry to actually reflect their sentiment. And there's a lot of people talking about, they're saying, they print too many cards and Bank of America is concerned because they're devaluing the secondary market. No, that's not what they're saying. They're talking about actual product fatigue. Just they don't have the language to say that. They don't understand it well enough. And ultimately, what they say in this report does not matter. Like their findings, their basis for it, it's irrelevant because the entire thing is a house of cards put together by people wearing a full clown suit all the time. And it's an absolute joke. And I know that from having been inside of it, but it doesn't matter because that joke still has weight. So as soon as you put something like that out there, it gains momentum, it gains following, it gains influence over your stock price, which influences your boss's opinion of your product, which now influences, how hands-on they're going to be and how much they're directing things. And it's this really big snowball. Again, I don't know if I mentioned on the podcast, but I retweeted it on my Twitter account. Someone mentioned something called the trust thermocline, which I am a 100% believer in, where you just have the faith, you have the engagement of your consumers, and then you don't in the blink of an eye. And I want you to go and look at this week's Weekly Magic and check out the YouTube comments on that. And you tell me if we've hit a trust thermocline, because it is just a massacre out there. Everyone demanding, why won't you address the fact that everyone wants you to print fewer cards? And the response that Blake gave, and this is not to pick on Blake, because the one thing I come away from all of this convinced is that dude deserves infinitely more money. I don't know what he's being paid. He deserves way more because the amount of bullshit he has to swallow that he is in no way responsible for.
Right. Yeah.
You could not pay me to do that job.
He's obviously in a tough spot. Like Helene had to do the same stuff back in the day,
I think his job is infinitely worse because it's just like Helen was dealing with like a vocal minority. He gets a vocal majority almost, and the access to like responses to him it's way better than it was in Helen's day. Not to minimize what she went through. I mean, she went through a lot of bullshit, but you just couldn't pay me enough to do that job. Like there is no theoretical number you can come back with where I would say, yep, I'll sign up for that. So give him more money. But it's just people yelling, why won't you address this elephant in the room? And his response was something to the effect of, don't engage with the products you don't like. And then everyone in comments saying, okay, I don't like Magic anymore, so I'm not going to engage with it. And like, yes, that is what you were headed to. But there's still time, I think, maybe, to turn it around. Maybe not. The trust thermocline principle will tell you there actually is not time. We'll see. I don't have answers. Somebody like told me to hold off on taking my victory lap. If you think I'm taking a victory lap about Magic doing poorly,
this is depressing.
It's super depressing. It's the thing that I have tried to be loud and fight against for years now because I saw it coming, not because I wanted it to come. So it's not a victory lap. It's a depression lap and trying to help people recognize how dire things are.
Obviously, there are a lot of factors involved. You know, pandemic is certainly one of them. And one could argue that I should have been better at like adapting and changing with the times or whatever. But I'm making about a fifth of the amount of money that I made 3 years ago. Yep. You know, so whatever I told you so's we have, you know, it doesn't feel that good. Trust me, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I had to jump ship to continue making a living doing this thing that I love. It wasn't even a reality that I could stay involved with Magic anymore as my career. And that shit's depressing. I love Magic. I want it to be great.
And let me tell you, it's not viable for me either. You know, I have yet to pick something else up. That is all. And in the meantime, I am spending more than I'm making by a fair amount.
So this is a fine moment to just point out the fact that here on the Arena Decklist podcast, we've never picked up shady sponsors. We've never gone for the quick buck and tried to just jam ads down your throat for products that we may or may not believe in or, you know, don't do sufficient research on. So it's always been about Patreon for us. Like I said, I'm pretty good now. I've moved on to a new thing. My buddy Gerald out here is still trying to make it work. How about checking out that Patreon page, supporting the Arena Decklist podcast? If you like what we do, we appreciate you.
Honestly, man, what I always like to do it in the reverse, which is give people the thing that they don't even necessarily know that they want.
No, you're right. That is the correct way to do it. And that's how we built all of this, I think.
Right. And just provide value. Yeah. And then at some point, like plug the Patreon or whatever. I'm still at the point where I am attempting to figure out what it is people will appreciate me doing.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I keep coming up with is just not involved with Magic. Right.
That is sad.
And I'm just like, damn it. All right. I'm going to start over, you know? And it's like, I've been going through that process for about a year and a half, like trying to think of what to do, because anything as far as like me getting involved in the commander space or whatever, it's like, it's not genuine.
You know, right? It just radiates disingenuousness, and I see it all the time. And we flirted with it. And I think it wasn't that people necessarily didn't like Brawl stuff. At least for me, it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like genuine. It didn't feel like what I wanted to be doing. And, you know, as you look for your next thing, that's the other thing too, right? Your next thing, the type of people we are is to be genuine, to do things we love. And I'm so fortunate to have found another game that I do have that true, real passion about. Until you find that, it's just, you know, it's a lost cause. You have to really just settle in and figure out the thing that speaks to you.
Lost cause is an apt description of me currently. Yes. Thank you.
I do believe you will find that thing eventually. I feel strongly about that, but you know, you can't rush that process. You have to find your passion.
Well, you can't rush it. And yet there's only so much time.
And so much money. Yes, that is how it works. Which is why a nice holdover would be to support the Arena Decklist podcast, I would say.
Or not. Whatever. I mean,
whatever. Do what you want to do.
What I would love is for people to be able to tell me what would actually be good, and you know, then maybe want to support it or whatever. But
well, it's hard because they're going to say things like sideboard guides, but like nobody cares. Just nobody cares.
I'm getting there.
Okay, sorry.
Basically, whenever I ask these questions, I have found that I do not get the right answers, and by that I mean like, people will tell you what they think it is they will tune into, and then they don't show up, right? Or they don't appreciate as much as they said they would, or whatever. And that is what I meant earlier when I say, like, give people a thing they don't know that they want.
Yeah.
And that's basically it. So, like, asking you directly, I'm sure that there are some people out there who can answer that, like, truthfully and honestly. And it's not like people are being false about it. It's just like they don't know. They don't understand themselves well enough.
Right. Because the answer is not actually about what you, the individual, wants. It's about what you, the collective, wants. And you need to hit the broadest piece of the collective you can. And it just, is there a group of people that, had you devoted yourself tirelessly to this pioneer format and gone down to the RC with the perfect deck list, would have appreciated that, would have supported that 100%?
No, it's like 100 people.
That was my next point. 100 people would be my guess, and they would love it and appreciate it. It would mean so much to them, and that is great. But that's not the market. Like, you have to speak to more people than that to do it for a living anyway. And like, now I'm going to say the ecosystem word, but like, when the ecosystem was in place, you could kind of count on that huge collective ending in the same place. When the shared experience was in place, you could count on a collective ending in the same space. So yes, maybe it's only, a small niche population, but you've gotten them all to care about Pioneer at the exact same moment. So the 2,000, 3,000 people can commit to that idea.
Yeah.
Without that shared experience, it just doesn't work.
Agreed. Also, the experience is kind of medium. I'm not going to Atlanta, by the way. I'm just not. The one thing that is kind of like pulling on me to go down is that my friend Jake lives down there. And then he told me
he's qualified too, right?
No, I think like he won a badge.
Okay.
But then he told me a couple days ago that he's not even going, and he just like lives in the area. So,
meh. It's all very meh. It sounds like, though, they may announce some coverage either today or tomorrow for it, which is nice for this event that's going on in 2 days. But
that's good. But why would you do it the day before?
Good question, Gerald.
Whatever. I don't care. None of this matters. Anyway, do you care about Standard at all? Like,
I care about these new cards. That's the problem. And looping back around, it goes back to why Standard matters. I want a home for these new cards. I want these new cards to matter to me because I think they're cool as hell. Like, I actually really enjoyed our show last week. There were so many awesome cards to talk about. And I think, like, on the whole, this set is very good. But if there's not a Standard to play them in, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, there's maybe 4 cards seen play in Pioneer from this new set. So, and then obviously
there might be a little bit more, but there's nothing game breaking. It's like, oh, this is a nice upgrade. This is a nice thing here, nice tool or whatever. But yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, it doesn't change the dramatic aspects of the format at all.
Right. So to answer your question, I would love to hear about your experience with Standard. I guess in short form, I'm not sure anyone else really cares that much. But particularly if there's any new cards that have impressed or disappointed you thus far, that is still very interesting to me, just on the basis of these being game pieces, much less than actually what's going to happen with Standard, because, I think the same 50 people will continue playing it on Magic Online, and some faceless masses will continue to play it on Arena. But it's mostly just like, for them, the way I treat Marvel Snap, where like I have my Marvel Snap cards and I play the deck I want, and I don't take it all that seriously, and it's a nice little diversion.
Yeah. I didn't actually build a complete version of this deck, but I did do a search for Soldier, and I, put cards into deck on Arena and then closed it. So, maybe this is a reasonable approximation of a deck or whatever, but I highly doubt it. So, did a search for Soldier, right? Dude, there's just a lot of soldiers. There's just like a lot. But it does look like it was basically what I was talking about, where it's like a bunch of, 2-power white creatures, and then
no disruption.
Yeah, like you kind of have like your Crypt Breaker and a reasonable curve. I guess maybe there could be some better 1-drops. But whatever. Like things like Protect the Negotiators makes a soldier. You remember that card?
No, I do not.
1 instant, kick or dub. If it was kicked, make a 1/1 counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each creature you control.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I don't know. That, like, obviously it's not good with Thalia, but it's kind of like a backup to the Thalia thing that also sort of works with your game plan and everything. So I don't know. Whatever. I didn't actually play with that. It did not look good to me. Really hate the idea of spewing rare wild cards on very isolated decks. You know, like some random rare 2-drop soldiers. Like, nah, I'm not going to do that. The first deck that I actually did build and make tweaks to and craft things for, and also I didn't have to craft much because this is just kind of my wheelhouse and I sort of own everything, is just like random blue-red spells pile that seems pretty good. So Third Path, Iconoclast, obviously very good. Small bonus upside of the 1/1s being artifacts, so you can sack them to Voltage Surge and stuff like that. Obviously, it's like pretty good with Make Disappear.
Did you play Saheeli's by any chance?
So you're gonna maybe like this or hate this. I don't know. My top end is 1 Saheeli, 1 Jaya, 1 Lear, 1 5-drop Teferi.
Love it.
Okay, and then
love the spread.
This doesn't really count as top end, but maybe I have a couple Arcane Proxies in there too.
Okay. What's been your review on Arcane Proxy thus far?
I think it's solid. It's just dependent on the importance of the stuff that you are flashing back, right?
Yeah.
And in this deck, you have obviously just lots of good 1-mana removal. And the 2-mana removal is solid, but it's really questionable which ones you're supposed to be playing. You have Fires of Victory, Obliterating Bolt, Abrade. I'm sure there's some other ones, right? And the way the deck is set up currently, doing stuff like Arcane Proxy, flashback my Fires of Victory doesn't really work because you just don't have a ton of cards in your hand. You're very much just like a play my hand to the board kind of thing. So stuff like that is sort of awkward. And then a decent amount of my spell slots were also taken up by some counter magic. So more cards that don't really work with Proxy. But overall, I think the card is still good. I even did stuff like play it, flashback, Fading Hope, bounce itself just to make it open, because I was like, I can't, my opponent's board is clear. This Fading Hope is useless because they're a control deck and I can just play this now to get a 1/1. Sure, whatever. Yeah.
That's my kind of magic right there.
Saheeli works pretty well with Iconoclast. Also, I was originally pretty skeptical of not having enough artifacts to, use with Saheeli, use with Voltage Surge. I think it's mostly fine. Like Lear, Fading Hope stuff is pretty nice, pretty cool for a top end in kind of a tempo-y deck. I know that you've done stuff like that before. Jaya was actually not that bad now that you have this army and a can card to make the -2 actually do something.
Yeah.
And then Teferi is just awesome.
Do you think there is a home for Teferi that is more just like a Teferi deck rather than, I have this Teferi at my top end?
Probably. I could see some green-blue ramp into it kind of thing, or using it in a control deck. That's certainly very reasonable. I don't know if there's like a white-blue mid-range kind of thing. Maybe you could do something along those lines or whatever. But yeah, I think the card is just like versatile and generally pretty solid. So it would not surprise me if it shows up in a bunch of places.
I am very excited to hear that. I am quite fond of that card. So anything else you want to say about blue-red? Because I really want to check in with the black cards, actually, and see. I don't know if you've played with them, but that's kind of where my attention lied, especially given that black already felt like the best color in Standard.
So this might not be the best implementation of this sort of thing, but you may remember that I played a black, more of an aggro deck in the last qualifier thing.
Yep, I remember the list.
Okay, so I updated that mostly because I felt like a lot of the cards that I wanted to play from this set sort of fit that archetype better. Stuff like Transmogrant, Misery Shadow, even Flesh Gorger, just draining them. Obviously, that ability is much more impactful the more you're pressuring their life total. Right?
Sure.
So, sort of updated that deck, and I mean it's good. Like at this point, you have really good options all up and down the curve. You get to do things like play Go for the Throat and Fertile Grasp mix. You have Disfigures in the sideboard. Basically, like a lot of the kind of 5-set standard issues I had where I was like, I don't have good options to get a little bit away from this sort of thing. It's like now you just have options everywhere for whatever you want always. And yeah, I guess basically all the cards are rares too. So
Yeah.
it's kind of got that going for it. But again, this is one of those things where I just owned most of the stuff already. So not a big deal. Flesh Gorgers, and I think I had like one of each Transmogrant and Misery Shadow from doing some seals or whatever. So it cost me like 6 wild cards. So not that bad. But yeah, man, just good stuff up and down the curve. You have some disruption. You have not really great comeback mechanisms. You can play kind of a longer game with like Shieldred and Underdog, and you have a bunch of mana sinks with like Misery Shadows and stuff like that. But if your opponent creates like an overwhelming board presence, there's not a whole lot you can do. But the inverse is true also, where you're good at creating those overwhelming board presences and there's not much that they can do. So I think most of the time you're getting it in good, but a lot of the times you lose, do feel kind of helpless.
Interesting. A card that we like never mentioned in any of our discussion of the format, Transmogrant's Crown. This is the 2 colorless artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw a card. Equip for 2 or equip for 1 black. Any love for that in these type of setups? Like I could see a world where you have these Transmogrants, you have these underdogs, these things that are very, very disposable, but their bodies sort of don't hit that critical threshold where they can just be stonewalled by something like a Shieldred, like a Rafine. And if you look at something like Transmogrant's Crown against these mid-range decks that want to just kind of grind you to dust, maybe that becomes really hard if you're able to combine your recursive threats alongside Transmogrant's Crown.
I think that works in like 2004 and not in 2022.
Maybe.
Like the way the games play out, or the situations you find yourself in where you can't win, aren't like, oh, I have a bunch of 3 power things and they have like a 4 toughness thing.
Yeah,
or
they have an entire battlefield of
yeah,
nonsense.
like they've just like you missed a 2-drop, they bricked your 1, they killed your good 3, and now they're starting to like pull ahead with some card advantage and they're like going wide, and it's just like, oh, I could like skull clamp my thing, but you're sacrificing mana, which means that you're sacrificing board presence because you could be spending that mana to actually develop your board and try and stay on parity with them or whatever. The games just don't play out that way. And it's never like, oh, if my thing had 1 more power, I'd be able to attack through them, or I just need a way to spend my mana. Because like I said, you have Sleeper. I had the Night of Dust, Night of Shadows, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Misery
all the
Shadow
prototype stuff, returning Transmogrant. I mean, there's literally like a scaling ability on every single card in the deck, basically.
Dude, up until like, I don't think the games went much longer than this, but like up until turn 8, I'm using my mana every single turn, and I'm not investing anything to that. Like I'm not even playing like Bankbuster in my deck, right? And like Bankbuster is the ultimate way to do that kind of thing and have that set up. And you just don't need it because that's just what all your cards already have baked in. So
is that a good or a bad thing for the game?
I think it's pretty terrible, honestly. Like games do kind of need to end. It is a fairly dramatic moment when you like run out of stuff to do, and then you have like that draw step to see if you hit like a land or a spell. Obviously, like you draw the land, and now you're just drawing dead, and it feels bad or whatever. But it's way better than playing something like Hearthstone or Shadowverse, where like you just never run out of gas because you never draw lands.
Yeah.
Like those games are frustrating in their own right because like your opponent's always gonna peel. They're always gonna have something. And I don't know, man. I think that Magic was better when you had to like really scrape the bottom of the barrel to get ways to use your mana up until turn 8, if you felt like you really needed that in the matchup.
Yeah, and I don't even think it was that long ago, because you think back to things like the double face lands. Like the entire appeal of that was that you now had access to, like, I thought they would revolutionize the game, and I guess they like somewhat did if their conclusion is to lead to this point. But the idea that you just like always have it, you always have something to do, you both hit your land drops and use your mana efficiently, was kind of revolutionary. And not to say no deck had done it before, but it was really pronounced in this instance. Like you were able to do it extremely reliably. And now to just go, what are we, 2.5, 3 years later, where just every single card in the black aggro deck is basically a split card and can use your mana at multiple points in the curve and is always a mana sink. It's a little frustrating. It makes it a little too easy.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, even there's Bankbuster, right? Like any deck could play a card like that, and that has sort of been a consistent presence in Standard with like this and Maze Mind Tome, Treasure Map. Like you've made those comparisons, right? And they are definitely different. They kind of work better in different decks and stuff, but ultimately they do kind of accomplish the same goal where it's like, well, if you tend to have some mana lying around, just play this colorless thing in your deck. It'll probably be better for you. And it has been.
Yeah.
So it's just frustrating, you know, like I don't want to play against people who always have like 6 cards in their hand or whatever. It's just not, I don't know. It's not very fun, I guess.
No, I agree 100%. And it's interesting that it's kind of a port over of the Commander experience, because in the Commander context, like, sure, one person may have used all their stuff, but there's X other people involved in the game, right? So
yeah,
you actually never are out of things happening, out of resources. And, you know, some sect of player base absolutely loves and embraces that. But I do think it leaves certainly lower powered competitive formats like Standard at a bit of a crossroads. Another crossroads for Standard, just because it really needed another one.
I think there's a happy medium. You know, I think that there is a place where, yes, you have stuff to do. Maybe you get to play some Balaged recoveries in your deck or whatever.
Right.
But not every card should be a mana sink, and not every land should have channel or be a creature land or whatever. And obviously that's hyperbolic, right? Like not every single card is like that. But like those are a lot of the cards that end up seeing play. And even looking at some of the other decks, a lot of the early drops that I have in some of these decks are things like Rafine's Informant that are just like fixing, smoothing your draws and things like that. Wedding Announcement can potentially draw you cards. And
yeah, because if you play cards, you will eventually reach this power level, which is another reason like why we saw high land counts become the norm, and why I still think actually I often see decks where I'm like, you should just be playing 2 more lands in this. There's no reason to mess with this. You will find a home for all of this mana, I promise.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Other stuff I looked at is just like some mono red aggro. Didn't really come to a consensus best list for that or anything, because again, there's a lot of options. I looked at some of the white mid-range stuff, but it looked mostly samey to what people were doing beginning of last format, just with some new cards. So I didn't mess with that too much. Yep. And then the thing that I think is maybe pretty good that someone who is not me will figure out, because this is not exactly my wheelhouse. Like I can see the pieces, but it's really hard for me to like actually put them together in a cohesive thing. And I ended up building like 3 different decks, but they're just like all these green cards that are pretty aggressively costed, right? And a lot of them scale particularly well, especially some of the 1-drops, like, you know, Teething Wormlet was the one that I definitely wanted. One of my decks had Ascended Pack Leader also. Sure. And then those are things that are both potentially modified. So then like Kadama of the North Tree. And then you have a lot of decent prototype things. And it looks like you can build either a beatdown deck that just like scales up to 8-drops, which I think is awesome. Or you just do like full on very defensive rampy stuff with Karn, Living Legacy, and just, you know, whatever the hell you want, basically.
Yeah, and just hit that massive endgame state where you're just jamming these prototypes at full costs and getting your Titan of Industries online, all that good stuff. Yeah, the green cards seem quite powerful now. And I am more inclined, which is weird for me, to think that ultimately they'll just be like a good beat down trending towards mid-range deck. Like all the pieces seem there for that to just be really strong. You're just above curve all over the place. And again, your mana spends at every single point. You just have nothing but options, nothing but places to go ahead and put your mana into. And maybe it's more about finding the engine. You're missing the Great Henge. Like that's the missing piece right now. And if you find that, then you just have this terror of a green deck.
So I think this was not very clear to me when I was actually playing games. And I think Arena might do it in a weird way where like, so when you prototype something, does it still have the big mana cost? Like on the card in play?
I believe so.
That's how I assumed it worked. I think Arena might show you differently or something. But basically, like, I was building these decks after playing with my sealed decks and the Flesh Gorgers and stuff. And then going through the green cards, I was like, I wonder if there's this prototype 6 mana thing, Cradle Clear Cutter. It's 6 mana, 3/6, taps add G equal to its power, and prototype 2G for a 1/3. So it's like a 3 mana thing that can tap for more mana if you have a good way to pump it. I didn't really find a good way, but like, if you can Vivian this thing away into a Titan of Industry, I like, that's pretty good.
All right, here's why I'm now questioning my assessment. So I'm just reading the description of prototype. Prototype reads, you may cast the spell with different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps its abilities and types. So if the size remains different, like if it comes in as a 3/3 creature, then it follows from that the mana cost should also remain different and the color should remain different.
Yeah, right? I honestly don't know. I didn't actually play any games with this because I would have to craft way too many nonsense cards like Karn Living Legacy. So
yeah, it's interesting. My guess is that it takes on a new mana cost in play.
Okay, which I think is how Arena was displaying it.
Okay,
so that would make sense, but I didn't actually read the FAQ.
Yeah, me neither.
So all right, I'm gonna delete this deck, and then if
it's gone, that's it.
If it shows up later, someone breaks it. I mean, cool. You know, I was almost there, but yeah, didn't actually put that into practice or Google search. It was just one of those things where, like, I saw it, didn't immediately think about it. Like, I saw that it could possibly be a thing that works, and then didn't have a reason to think that it didn't work, and then built the thing, and then was like, does this actually work? And yeah, and then I went to sleep because, you know, it was 6 a.m. or whatever, and I was tired. So
we've all been there. I have built entire decks that just don't function. So if you build enough decks, you'll certainly go down that road at some point.
Yeah, and I mean, it would have been very easy to figure out. I just didn't, and then forgot about it. So
I'll allow it.
Cool. Well, regardless, even if that doesn't work, you know, I think maybe the Cradle thing is good if there's a good way to pump it. Another thing I found was like Blanchwood Armor. You know, it's like Blanchwood Armor's in the set, and it's like that's not a terrible card. And you have
it's mattered before.
Yeah, you have Tamio Safekeeping and stuff like that, and maybe putting Blanchwood Armor on my mana rampy thing is not a great plan because I don't know, maybe you don't draw the mana rampy thing and then you just have this Blanchwood Armor deck that's not really a beatdown deck. So whatever, but it's a thing. It's a possibility. I don't know. Or just like playing actual beatdowns with Blanchwood Armor and Audacities and I don't know, Tramplers, whatever.
It's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of power wrapped up in an archetype that's like sort of maligned. You know, Little Kid Green is always the moniker you hear used about it, but it's just different now. I mean, these scaling threats are so clean. They're so exactly what every deck 10 years ago would have flipped their shit over one of, and there's like 10 of them in every deck. So
yeah, and it's an embarrassment of riches too.
Yep.
There's, you know, Gala's Greeters, Queer and Beast Caller, the 2 mana Llanowar Loam Speaker, I think is the name of it. The 1/3 mana creature that makes your lands 3/3s. Is like, not all of those are making your deck, which is like kind of outrageous considering how good they are, especially if you're playing Kodama. You know, it's like those are the perfect Kodama enablers, and they're just like not good enough or whatever. You have better options.
Another weird spot for Standard is like, why make all these redundant options that can only match, like they're not good enough to push to older formats. So like, if you're going to invest in having all these redundant options, who are they for except people who want this type of deck building, these type of options?
Well, I like that type of deck building.
Me too.
I think,
but you need a place to do it. Like that's my whole point. You need a standard format to do it in.
I think it's completely fine for Gala Greeters to get released, someone to be excited for it, and then for them to print basically like an upgrade in the next set. Not saying that Beast Caller is an upgrade to it. I think that they're just good in different shells or whatever. I do agree with you that, like, yes, in theory, there should be some standard support behind this to actually make it so people are like, you know, jam my wild cards on this 2-drop in set 5 and then jam my wild cards replacing that card in set 6 or whatever. But Arena just kind of like functions on its own. You know, it's like I was playing standard games and getting matches pretty close to, like 20 to 30 seconds. Sometimes it went a little longer or whatever, but I don't think it ever took more than a minute, I mean, there are people playing standard, and if not standard, maybe there are some people playing alchemy or whatever. I don't know.
I doubt that. I'm skeptical that those humans exist, but if they do, I hope they're having a great time.
Me too. So I agree. Yeah, more standard support probably makes sense, but at the same time, trying to push everyone towards having more shared experience, or there being like more kind of format diehard people, I think also makes sense. And then if it's getting to the point where it's very clear that there's no coming back from this for standard, then we will start to see that like a year or 2 years down the line when they start developing sets differently, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're
not going to see it immediately.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that frustrates me the most working on the design side of things is that there's so much lag, and like you learn something and you're like, shit, I really have to live with this thing I've learned and not be able to do anything with it for a year.
If you worked in digital, it'd be different.
Yeah. Well, that's another interesting point of it too, is like the sensibilities of your players are also warping towards the digital sensibility and weekly patch notes. So you need to somehow and what I try and do is just tell people like, look, every time I have a conversation with Flesh and Blood players, I'm like, look, I hear it. I promise we were listening. It just takes so much time. I'm so sorry. I want to do this thing for you now, and it's just going to take so much longer because their appetites are such that they expect instant results, and you just can't do that. There's no printing press that would allow you to adapt in that fashion. There's no release model that works like that. And it's really hard. You have to command an incredible amount of trust and respect from your players to be able to get away with it. Trust and respect, Gerald. It turns out those things are critical. Who knew?
Had no idea. I was talking to someone about this the other day, where the Magic community specifically, when I don't know, Magic started being like a little bit more popular on Twitch, right? And then there's the whole Twitch culture where if you were like a diehard PC gamer, you were already entrenched, right? I mean, you were watching like StarCraft or League of Legends there and watching streamers and understood that Twitch subs were like an integral part of the process and the ecosystem and everything. But then say 2014, I'm streaming basically full time and have like 1,000 viewers on the reg and have 40 Twitch subs.
Yep.
And Magic was just like not that audience, right? And now I think that there's more of a mesh in between those audiences, right? It's just like, well, if you play Magic, you probably also play like Destiny or League or Fortnite or whatever, right? And you probably watch things that are not Magic on Twitch and YouTube and etc.
Yep. Where it was almost singular before.
Right. So now you have like that digital mentality when it comes to a paper game. And it's like, no, you need to go back to how you were thinking about it a decade ago, at least for this thing, Well, like we can't patch stuff in a week. It's just not doable. Like we could just errata stuff all the time, but that seems like not a good solution.
And I will say some games do that. I actually heard that Digimon, which was gaining a lot of popularity and like doing pretty well for a while, is running into a world where they're just having to errata everything. And, that's its own huge set of problems.
Yeah. I don't know what the actual player base is like, but I imagine that it is a game designed for children or like marketed at children.
It had a good competitive base building for a while, honestly.
Yeah, but was it comprised of like 12-year-olds or like 30-year-olds?
I would say like 22, 23-year-olds. A lot of what I saw. This is anecdotal, so
yeah, that's even weirder to me. I don't get it. Whatever. Yeah, it's tough to make a game for 10-year-olds and then also just be like, well, what the card says isn't actually what it does. And you have to remember this,
Yeah.
So yeah, slippery slope. I don't really like that solution. The best solution is just wait 2 years until the development cycle catches up.
A lot of patience, a lot of trust required for that.
Or find some weird way to fast track that process and make it so it doesn't lag as hard. But that will almost certainly come with its own set of issues.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the realities of printing, especially this day and age, make that extremely challenging. And I didn't know this until I got more involved with that side of the process. But printing's tough. It's really tough. You need a ton of lead time. It's not as easy as you would think it is to get cards into people's hands.
And there's not, from what I can tell, there are not a lot of places that are very good at doing it.
Yep.
And then on top of that, there are now just logistical and supply chain issues.
Yep. A ton of those. A ton of demand for printing press space at this moment. Like card games are very popular. Some of the infrastructure is not scaled as well. Still a lot of the same people who are printing Magic cards 25 years ago. So yeah, it's an interesting world, one that I was not familiar with, and would have said some pretty silly, ignorant things about in the past, just because I didn't have the knowledge.
Oh, I could have told you some stuff for sure.
Yep, I'm sure.
I've heard some stories. Limited was pretty interesting. I actually liked it.
I'm getting such mixed reviews on Limited. It's really all over the place.
Okay, so I'm not going to say the format is like balanced or good because I haven't played enough to actually know that yet. But in terms of scratching the itches that I need scratched, it did a good job of that, because there's a lot of like very tiny synergies, and I don't know, just artifact sets generally do that for me for some reason. I think it's just there are more possibilities than just like a generic like, okay, here's 5 colors and you build a color pair and like that's it, right? And then a lot of the cards have modality, which is also cool, and you get to construct basically whatever game plan you want. And if you are playing best of 3 or whatever, it just kind of like multiplies from there, where you get even more options depending on what your opponent's trying to do and everything. I don't know. It was fun for the short amount that I did get to play it. I think I played through 3 sealeds and did a draft or something. But yeah, that's about it. But I liked it.
The biggest beef that I've heard, and it's something I've seen presented as both a strength and a weakness of the format. I think you would see it as a strength, knowing how you think about limited formats, is these artifact cards, the reprints, and how extremely game warping they can be. I heard someone say like Worm Coil Engine is the most benign thing you can lose to out of that artifact slot, and then there's just preposterous things that can happen. You can get Sundering tightened out of the game, or just milled out very quickly.
I didn't know that those things existed. Okay, so also, when you open a sealed deck on Arena, right? It's just like, you open your packs, it shows you 6 rares. Cool. When you open packs for this set, for whatever reason, they can't display all the rares, because sometimes you can
only show 6. Yeah.
Yeah, and it shows you 6, and then it says plus 1 more or whatever. And it's like, why don't you just show me it instead of displaying that text?
Nah.
And also, why did you show me Sword of the Meek versus a card that's actually in the set?
That is a very good question. I'm going to assume it's programming related with no knowledge of how that works.
Right.
It can't be a purposeful decision, right? That's the only thing that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It was just like, dude, I really, there are things about Arena where I'm just like, why? And I'm just frustrated because it should not be like this. Like, it makes no sense for it to be like this. And there had to have been, maybe not like gross oversight, but definitely like some amount of oversight to have a thing pop up like this where, it shows you your rares plus 1 more. You have to go digging for it. Just come on. Like, a better solution would have been just don't show me the rares, which I think would have been a fine way to do that in general.
Yeah, a fully fleshed out feature or a non-fully fleshed out feature is better off just not being there, right?
Yeah, also when it's questionable whether it should have been in there in the first place. Like, sure. I understand that is what most people do, is like they go and look for the rares or whatever, but it's like, I don't care. I need to look at the pool as a whole. Right.
Yeah. And you can't do that. There's no way to actually look at the whole pool on one screen. So
no,
that was not important.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, some interesting decisions there.
and okay, also one last gripe. Elsewhere Flask is a card that you will usually end up playing and is absolutely miserable on Arena because it has you stop on every
priority
phase.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that you shouldn't put it in that slot or whatever. Maybe you shouldn't have those cards be playable in limited. I don't know, because it doesn't seem like it's a thing that many people enjoy. But I don't know, man. Like there is a conscious effort for some people in the building to not design cards like that because they're a miserable experience on Arena. And
yeah, it's something that they were thinking about very carefully for a long time. We saw a lot of cards warp around that principle.
right. So I don't want it to come to a point where it annoys me so much that I'm just like, all right, I'm not going to play this card because it just makes the whole thing less fun for me, even though
Yep.
it's a card that would like definitely help my deck.
Similar problem with King Extra Large. Same exact thing where you just constantly have that priority and it's super annoying. And I am shocked. They were so careful about that for a long period of time, and they just kind of seemingly took the brakes off. And I actually think it's a big deal for user experience. I am confident other games could work around it because I've seen it happen. They found good systems to work through those type of effects. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not flasking on my opponent's turn. I mean, it did come up when I got Sundering Titaned, and I could have used the flask, but I was
How about just like a little click box on the flask? You can click on and off where it's either functional or not functional.
yeah, just F you flask. I'm
Pretty
done.
easy.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, are you sure you want to only do this at sorcery speed or whatever? It's like, yeah, that's way better. I'll lose the extra land to Sundering Titan. I don't care.
Yep.
But then they would have to program a thing, which they didn't do for the sealed deck opener, so unlikely.
Yeah, unlikely indeed.
Anyway, what? Again, ultimately, end of the day, like who cares, right? It's not that big of a deal, but it just doesn't have to exist. So I don't get it.
Nor do I. I hope some QOL improvements come through. It would be nice. On the whole, though, positive experience with your brother's limited.
Yeah, it was good. Limited was good. Limited was fun. If I have a reason to keep playing, I will continue playing. I, have no gripes about it. But like a lot of the same stuff could be said about standard, where
Yep.
I would
Need
keep
a reason.
I would keep grinding. But if you don't give me a reason, then yeah, I'm not gonna. And actual organized play is clearly not that reason because I'm not going to Atlanta despite being qualified. So I don't know.
Is there a shape of organized play that would do it for you? Like, is it about? Do you just not care about organized play, or do you not care about organized play as it's shaped presently?
I mean, a lot of it has to do with like big crowds, no masks, and like me not wanting to kill
Sure.
anyone. So,
Yep.
I mean, that's basically it. Like, say there was no pandemic, say it never happened or whatever. Like, I'd be there, even though I didn't care about the tournament. I have gone to several Magic tournaments that I did not care about because it just hanging out, having a reason to get out of the house is good, and I could certainly use that. But I'm not going to like potentially endanger people to play in a Magic tournament that I don't care about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes perfect sense. And I wish that they would do the bare minimum. And it is the bare minimum, and it's a small ask, but people are just over it. It's frustrating.
Yep, I agree. Could talk about Pioneer as a whole, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say about Pioneer, except I'm kind of going to say the same thing I've been saying for a long time, and that's that Lotus Field is still very good, especially as the format warps around this idea that like mono green devotion is the only thing you have to account for. That matchup is medium. I mean, it's not great. It's not miserable. I think it's kind of a toss up, quite frankly. There's not a sideboard card out there for Lotus Field. I just don't see them, and it is starting to pick up results again. If I was playing the RC, that's what I would play. Maybe I'm just like predisposed to make that decision, but I do honestly still think it's a really good decision. And I kind of wonder, maybe this tournament isn't high level enough. Like if this was a pro tour, maybe I would make this claim more authoritatively. But I wonder if you remember the first Pioneer, whatever it was called. I don't even know what we were set championship. Maybe it was called at that point.
No, it was Mythic Championship.
Was it a Mythic Championship in person?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Okay. But basically what happened was like Lotus Field was known, not really being played. And then you got to the Mythic Championship and every single team landed on Lotus Field because it was just like by far the best choice. It crushed the tournament, did fantastic. If this was a Pro Tour level event, I actually think we could be headed to the same thing. Now, as it stands, I'm not sure that will be the case.
I'm not sure that the field is as ripe for it as 4 months ago, 6 months ago. I think the format in general has sped up just a little bit. Part of that has been the decks that people are playing, but also just new cards getting printed and stuff like that. So yeah, there are no sideboard cards. That's definitely just going to be true, right? But I'm not sure if that is a big enough benefit, and you could be right about it. I don't know for sure. Much like everyone else, I've certainly not tested a whole lot with or against Lotus Field, right? So I don't know. But just from kind of eyeballing the format, it doesn't seem like a slam dunk to me. But it would definitely be the first thing to work out when I started testing. Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing I'll note, like you're right that the format has sped up. Lotus Field hasn't actually sped up. It kind of doesn't work that way. It just like hits its fundamental turn and it is what it is. But it does hit that turn more reliably and has fewer fizzle states, which
yes,
that's
definitely true. That's definitely
true. Won't manifest in the same way as like being faster, but it does over time manifest to less of those games where you just like don't find the piece. You're like, oh, if I just had this card in my top 4 cards, I would win. The card's going to be there a lot more times now. It's basically the function of that. So
right. So I would say you're doing more turn 4s, a fairly reliable turn 5 at the very least, right? Yep. And like when you start going off, it's not as bad as it used to be, where it was a lot of hope and pray before, but now you're just like so robust that it's very unlikely to just actually fizzle. So all of those things are good, but when more decks are able to goldfish you by turn 4, then it's just like, am I really going to bank on the die roll? Because it's not like you have a lot of ways to interact with them either.
Yeah, you're preying on those arboreal grazers. You're like, come on, boys, let's do a little defense here. And that's about it. You need them to matter if you're going to slow anyone down at all.
Yeah, like your interaction is praying that you draw the second grazer.
Yep.
Because they can probably pretty easily get through the first one.
Yep.
And
that's true.
It's not a great place to be,
You're giving up some agency for sure.
Well, it's not even that though. It's not even like, oh, I'm giving up agency. It's just that like you're not a lock to kill on 4. If you were a lock to kill on turn 4, then it's like, yeah, sure, I'll run that gambit, because either you win the die roll or you play against a deck who's slightly slower than you, then that's great. But when you're not a lock to kill on 4 and decks are pretty fast and, there's non-zero fizzle rate or someone having a sideboard card or whatever, then it's just like, it starts getting dicey.
Yeah, I guess what I would counter with that is my hope is that the evolution of the format, so like the people who take a step forward for this RC, it should be to get edge against mono green. If that step forward inherently slows down other clocks, then you can exploit that gap. Is that going to happen? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the way you actually deal. Like, I don't know that slowing down against mono green actually does you that many favors.
Right.
So.
That's kind of the problem, is like, if everyone is gunning for mono green, I think usually the best way to do that is by speeding up.
Yep.
And then if the format ends up being very fast as a result of that, then you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's definitely a high variance choice. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out for sure. And I'm looking forward to seeing the decks.
Or it's like humans, like white-black humans with a bunch of disruption or something. You're like, well, damn it. Like that is you're a turn 5 deck now, but you're going to play like 3 Thoughtseizes per game or something, or like 2 Thoughtseizes in Athalia. Not great. So a lot of problems to work through IMO with that deck. But you are definitely right, where if you're looking for a thing to potentially spike the tournament, that is a thing that you should absolutely work on. Thing that I was drawn to in a similar way than you were is like, obviously the Greasefang decks have a very good optimal draw. And then I think a lot of people are frustrated by the other games and their stuff doesn't come together. They get hit by disruption or whatever. And are willing to just throw the deck in the garbage as a result. And I look at the upside and then what the potential downside is. And then all I see are like the ways that you can fix it.
No, I agree. I think that deck is underexplored, and it just sort of speaks to my theory of non-rotating formats in general. It's just like find degeneracy, because you can't weed it all out. It'll always be there. And sure, you can line up your deck to account for all forms of degeneracy, but for years and years, Modern was just cycling through the correct non-interactive option on a week-to-week basis. And to some extent, Modern Horizons is what changed that, because the spells became better at interacting with the linear things, and the non-interactable things sort of got a target drawn on them, a lot of it through things like the elementals. But I do think that Pioneer doesn't have that safety valve. And if it got to the place where it was just like, oh, what inherently broken combo do we play for this event, that would not shock me whatsoever.
Yeah, I could see that too. Yeah, if there was some sort of turn 3 or like a little bit more consistent turn 3 than Lotus Field type of thing, and usually you turn 4, and then if you make it to turn 5, you're probably just going to lose because your draw obviously didn't come together. I would be more inclined to play a deck like that. I think something that's like Storm or Beergy or whatever, just like a crappy combo deck, effectively. More of like the first modern Pro Tour than anything, right?
Yep.
But I don't know. I don't know how many of those things exist or how good or stable they are, which basically makes me think about the Greasefang deck and how your optimal draws are very strong, very powerful, generally lights out against a lot of people. Although there are some decks where you do your thing and they don't care, right? They just untap and kill you or just ignore you and whatever. But as far as like the graveyard hate and fighting through the interaction, it's like you're playing Abzan. Like certainly you can find a way to overcome this. And there's so many good options for things, to beat like an unlicensed Hearst or a Rest in Peace or whatever that you're already playing, like Witherbloom Command, whereas like you wouldn't need much more help in order to just make those things completely a non-issue. And then if you're talking about like, oh, they're going to side in just like a ton of graveyard hate and thought seizes and creature removal or whatever, it's like, okay, then have some way to get card advantage or have a threat that doesn't get tagged by the removal spell and like find ways to side down on the combo. You know what I mean? And I was looking at a bunch of different configurations for that, and I found some stuff that I liked, but like never actually put it into practice or anything. So I don't know.
It's almost like Birthing Pod-esque in that regard, right?
Yeah,
where like if you played a bunch of Birthing Pod, it's not like you gave up on Birthing Pod, but you de-emphasized it. You shifted away from it. And then you were just like an okay beatdown deck that had this backdoor combo if they didn't respect it. And that was often good enough. And I think that deck needs to figure out that plan for sideboard matchups.
Correct. And all it takes is one person to do it in order for everyone else to copy it for it to become the norm, right? And you see shades of it showing up in deck lists where someone will have the occasional like Tasigur main deck or something, but nothing really to follow through with that out of the sideboard, which is kind of strange. Sometimes you see like some Graveyard Trespassers or Liliana the Veils or what have you, but no one has come up with an actual cohesive plan. And once that person does, that is the de facto list that everyone is going to be playing. And then whenever you play against that deck, it is going to become sort of the guessing game of like, well, are they sticking with the combo? Do I even want to board in Rest in Peace or whatever?
It's a good question. And I think we'll see that evolve maybe at this event.
And but like part of the reason I was more drawn to this than anything else is that all of the other decks in Pioneer are kind of playing face up, and you know what they're capable of, and there's not a whole lot that they can do to trick you or fundamentally alter any matchups or anything. If you show up with mono green, it is the same thing as like what everyone else is doing. It's just like, okay, you have like some Sky Sovereigns made or in the board or whatever, right? But like, what they are able to get up to in any given game. But Greasefang is the one deck where they may have even tested against you and they may have had the sideboard cards for you and they may think that they have a good matchup, but like it is the one deck that you can actually change that with how you build your deck. So in a tournament like this, where you're certainly looking for any edge that you can get, and the quality of player is going to be quite high, being able to explore something like that to get you those percentage points is just massive, right? There's no other deck in the format I can think of that is able to do that, except for like maybe the Fires decks that kind of came out like a little bit later and are still figuring themselves out too.
I was going to say Enigmatic Incarnation is the other one that comes to mind where you could maybe look at something like that. But
I think for the most
that deck's a bit too slow right now.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think that, yeah, you can change cards in the deck to like do different things, but like mostly you're doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know. There's got to, again, a birthing pod type setup when you have cards like Urian, some type of way to just like curve into Urian and leverage that is enticing. But of course, you're playing 80 cards in that scenario. So maybe not, more easily said than done.
Yeah. So I think that there is a possibility for people who have put in the hours, done the work, to show up with something that does fundamentally alter Pioneer going forward. And I'm excited for that. I want to see like the innovation and the change and everything. And I'm just hoping that it actually does happen. I'm hoping that basically like all the deck lists get published. I think that would be great. That would be
nice.
Good for the format to maybe move it along forward, because we've been kind of stuck in the same spot for a little bit. Obviously, the new sets coming out help a little bit. Fires being brought back from the dead helps a little bit and everything. But there's small changes. You know what I mean? We don't want people complaining about mono green for a year.
I agree. And I actually will also say that I'm not even sure mono green is like oppressively good. I think it's just miserable to play against. Like it's an absolutely miserable experience. Yeah. And that weighs into it so much. Like, in fact, if I look through the most recent challenge, and this challenge is before the release of Brothers, I'm a scrolling here. Looks like 16th place is the first instance of mono green.
Yeah, this happened before, though. This happened before where it was like,
for sure.
All over the place for a couple weeks.
I don't want to discount the deck for 1 second. I think it is the most like linear, consistently powerful, stupid thing you can do in Pioneer. It is annoying. It is frustrating to play against, and the format would probably be better without it. I don't know if we can move it through metagaming, but it doesn't hurt to try. And I think, like, again, Pioneer has to establish an identity. It's in a format where bans happen all the time and fix things. Is it something akin to the old Magic experience where bans are a last resort and the format is just supposed to be slow and supposed to churn a little bit? And is the current audience for the format receptive to that kind of pacing? Do they trust you to eventually figure things out, to focus on Pioneer, to give it the love it needs through printings? Probably not, is my answer to that. There probably is not the trust there. So we'll see. We'll see what happens at this RC and whether it demands some kind of action on this deck.
Yeah, I agree the trust is not there, but if the player base is happy to continue playing the format as is, I think that's all that matters, right?
Looks like the second most popular format now, the competitive format anyway. Commander, of course, being first, Modern second. I would put Pioneer third. So,
yeah, I'm not even sure Modern second. I'm sure that there's something else that I'm not thinking of.
Maybe like a non-commander format.
Yeah, probably.
Could be.
Maybe it's alchemy. Who knows? Yeah, just do whatever the player base wants at this point. I mean, I know that Wizards has taken their stance on the Delve spells being legal, Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, and that is one of the things that gives Pioneer a unique identity. I think it is fine for Pioneer to have a unique identity, like that's a noble goal. But it is really weird looking at Treasure Cruise and Nykthos and then expecting people to play with like Grizzly Bear Human or whatever, and it's only a matter of time before those cards start looking way, way better than everything else.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
So I don't know if this is a thing that has life long term, and if it doesn't, then you should probably get rid of it sooner rather than later. But kind of in the same way with like Brainstorm and Legacy, it's like, well, if the Pioneer players do actually like Nykthos or they don't care, then keep it around. Do whatever is good for the players, like in the players' eyes, right? And not necessarily like what you think is best.
Yep.
because
Yep.
yeah, like they're the audience, they're the market.
Yeah, it's tough. My solution would be to take mono green down a peg because I don't want to invalidate the people who have bought in, and unfortunately that sucks because the problem is Nykthos. It's not anything else. And you can't take away like old growth troll and think you've actually managed the format in an effective way. I mean, like, could you get away with Karn? Probably not. You probably kill the deck in that scenario too, but I'd at least look at that.
I mean, the Devo portion of it is good, but yeah, you might invalidate so many cards by removing Karn. Like, what does the best version of Devo look like that doesn't have Karn in it? I mean,
Maybe like Vivian based,
yeah,
probably.
like it probably doesn't have like Cavalier of Thorns and stuff like that, right? Like you would change like 20 cards in the deck probably,
Yeah.
which is not ideal. And
no, it's not.
Maybe Cavalier of Thorns didn't cost them a bunch, but like say you're making them change out 20 rares, I mean that's a big cost.
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough. You have to be conscientious of that with these formats.
How do you feel about the people who didn't buy in, but now have a playset of Nykthoses via playing RCQs?
That's another reason why you're kind of incentivized to keep it around. All these things matter a lot, and every single, having been involved with multiple ban list decisions now and weighing all the factors very, very carefully. No matter how careful you are about it, how much you work to hit the least valuable card and only degrade the deck a little bit and still leave it as a viable option, somebody will tell you they're quitting the game because of it. Just 100% of the time. And they will. Some people will follow through with that. Absolutely. The question is
empty threats.
Yeah, mostly some people will do it, but like ultimately you can't please everyone, and you just have to ask like, how do you please the most people, and how often are you going to be putting people through this grinder? How often are you going to be invalidating their entire purchase? And I think, here you're talking about just erasing $400 worth of value overnight from people, and that's a big deal. I would not take that lightly. So tough call.
Agreed. If there is a thing that you could do to slightly weaken the deck, I think that is a much better plan. But in terms of like Nykthos in general, it's a scary card to have legal.
Yeah, you might be stuck though at this point, is my read on it.
Well, then standard sets better get pretty powerful. They better stop being standard sets.
We just got a second Field of Ruin. What do you want, Gerald? It's under control. Problem is solved.
You can play so many Field of Ruins now. You're right.
Got him.
Anything else? Anything else we want to talk about?
New Flesh and Blood set came out this week. I don't know if you caught that. Dynasty released. That was the first set I worked on, and reviews have been good. I'm very happy with it. I hope people are enjoying the Assassin class, which was kind of my baby. Yeah, it's going very well.
Yeah,
very well.
How have you felt about the reception? Like, I know whenever we get a nice email and I forward it to you, we both just kind of like take a moment to like awe over it,
Yep.
And maybe it doesn't necessarily like make our day or whatever because we have short memories and attention spans, but definitely for like a few hours we feel pretty good as a result of like that thing, right? So like, how is creating a thing and putting out into the world and seeing the reception to that stacked up against like getting a nice email?
It hits harder because you have to know a little bit about Flesh and Blood, but like heroes are such a huge part of both player identity and game identity. And so to have such a large hand in shaping a class, which was like rumored forever, and so many people wanted there to be an assassin in Flesh and Blood, and to really come through with a flavorful representation of what it is to be assassin, one that is falling in a really nice place as far as gameplay goes. We've had some of our heroes in supplemental sets in the past just be way too good, format dominating. We've had some that are just sort of memes. This one seems to be falling right in the middle, which I'm really happy about. So yeah, it's just hitting on another level. Also, I will say that I had to take some steps to just like understand that it can't be a hero everyone loves. Like, it's really tough to have such a huge connection to it and to have some people just hate it, especially if they're people whose opinions you respect. But that's just the reality. Like, it should be polarizing. It should be a thing that some people like, some people hate. And if the sentiment is overall positive, I had to really work to focus in on the overall sentiment.
Yeah.
Rather than like each individual instance of response.
I guess it depends on why they hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of it is just like not serving their vision, their thematic vision of what the hero is. Some of it is that the play style is sort of rooted in what I would term more classic interactive Flesh and Blood. So it is extremely hard to play. Long games. It's a little grindy, which is a thing that some people don't like, some people love. So yeah, I think it's
yeah, but those aren't valid criticisms in terms of you did a bad job.
No.
You know?
I mean, but people will present it that way. That's the thing, right? It's like,
I know. Basically, what I'm getting at is that you need to be able to deconstruct where they are coming from and why they have those opinions, and then whether or not that is a thing that should make you feel bad or not.
Yep, agree 100%. And it took me a couple days to kind of find that space.
Okay.
And once I did, I sort of wrapped my head around it, and then like one of my favorite things is that the day the hero was revealed, I tweeted, I saw people saying it was the best hero in the entire game, the worst hero in the entire game, one that caused them to lose all respect for designers of the game, one that they thought was the most flavorful implementation of a class they'd ever seen. There's just literally polar opposites if you go looking for it. And it's just like, okay, I guess we covered all the bases and things are good.
Yeah, people have a lot of opinions.
They do. Many opinions.
Well, I'm glad that you get to have this experience. I mean, I know that you've had it before in a smaller degree, maybe, but
yeah, with Magic, my only influence was like small tweaks. None of those cards were designed by me. It's very different when it's like, the core of the card is what you made.
Right. So this is an awesome time for you, and that's rad. And I hope that you understand where the negative reactions are coming from, and it's not necessarily a criticism on, your ability or that you did a bad thing or whatever. It's like they just don't like it, and that's okay. And in a lot of instances, like you said, I mean, it can actually be a good thing, right? It's like it is resonating with people in a lot of different ways, which I think is a net good thing.
Yeah, I do ascribe to the idea that you'd rather have, I think it's Maro who's talked a bunch about this, just like rather than having a card that when you test score it, it's all fives, you would rather have a card that's a bunch of ones and a bunch of tens. That's way better overall for engagement, for passion, for being a meaningful thing. And also the fact that it's slanted way more towards tens than ones has made that a lot easier to swallow.
Yeah,
so
exactly. And make sure that you keep track. Not exactly, but just know that you have more tens than ones. You know what I mean? And don't let one be worth as much as like 10 tens or something.
Yeah. Well, the opposite is true as well. I mean, don't get focused on the 110 and realize that everyone else is screaming ones at you in the YouTube comment section. I think that is equally as dangerous as we have seen.
Yes, absolutely. I did not say that to you specifically because I don't think you're going to have that problem. But
right, very true.
If I did think you were going to have that problem, I wouldn't even necessarily share it with you because I know you wouldn't follow it.
I wouldn't be receptive to it. Exactly. So, that's the nature of that problem.
Yep. But yeah, you're not that person. So I just wanted to focus in on the positive because this is a positive time for you. It should be a positive time. I'm super stoked for you, man. This is great. And it's just going to keep happening. So
Yep.
Awesome.
Way more excited about the next set, which I can say nothing about, but that is the one I was on like from the beginning. All aspects of it have my disgusting fingerprints all over it. and either people will love it or hate it, but I'm excited to see.
Well, at this point, you know that there are going to be people that have both. So this is like playtesting for the real experience.
Yep. Very true.
Cool. I think that is it. To my friends who are going to the RC, good luck. Hope it is a fun time. Hope Pioneer is not miserable. Hope some folks break it and
be safe too. Encourage others to be safe. It does matter. I know it feels like you're like the lone person in a sea of people concerned about others, it still matters, and you can influence people by your decisions.
Yeah, I don't even know how much I'm supposed to like harp on this stuff. I could just this is the thing that I could have an entire podcast episode about. I'm just gonna say I agree with Brian. Do that, I guess.
Good enough.
Game.
Good luck.